about to hear a revolution in talk radio, Liberty Talk Radio, where the critical thinking will defrag your mind of propaganda-ridden viruses induced by mass media news programming. No BS here, just the facts.
And now we present to you America's quintessential iconoclastic anomaly. Wow. In talk radio, your host, Joe Cristiano.
Welcome, everyone, to Liberty Talk Radio, broadcasting from our studio in Tulsa, Oklahoma, to around the world. I'm your host, Joe Cristiano, and this is your antidote to popular talk radio. Today, we're pleased to have as our guest Mr. Jorge Gutierrez. Mr. Gutierrez heads the Business and Management and Operations Consulting Group, better known as the BMOC. He is a tested leader with a passion for leadership and professional growth. The focus is on organizational alignment through results-based leadership and leadership development. The group helps individuals and organizations to drive growth. This is accomplished by helping people achieve their goals. Welcome to our program, George.
Well, thank you so much. I sincerely appreciate you having me on.
Oh, it's our pleasure, believe me. George, you know, this subject interests me because many years ago, when I was a younger lad, I would give speeches on business organization, only because I worked for large organizations when I was young, and I disliked very much the way they operated. They were very, very bureaucratic, and I always felt that people should, even in large corporations, every individual should be an entrepreneur. I just mentioned that, but I'd like to hear, now, I know the arena that you are in is very crowded. There's no shortage of consultants out there. You know, it seems like most people lose their job, they become consultants, you know, even if they're not qualified. Now, you have a large corporation, you're successful in what you do. Tell me, what is your approach to and how do you differentiate yourself from the plethora of other people in that field?
All right. Well, thank you for asking. That's really a very interesting question. So the basic approach, and I call it basic because I really believe that it is to first make a real attempt to listen in an engaged way to understand what it is that either an individual or an organization is going through. It is through that listening process that we're able to tune in and try to figure out collaboratively what the potential gaps or things to work on might be. Now, you made a very interesting comment, and you referred to organizations in terms of bureaucracy. Then you also said that, you know, you believe that everybody should be an entrepreneur. And that is indeed very interesting. So when we look at bureaucracies, we sort of examine organizations that act like a machine. So a bunch of years ago, this theory of organizations as a machine was created, and it was very much inculcated into the system of business, both at the public and also at the private sector. So you do see these big bureaucracies out there that, for example, take a manufacturing company that really focus on systems and processes in such a way that they almost overlook the importance of the human factor because they're mostly focused on some kind of an output, some kind of a product or something that they need to do in order to satisfy their bottom line needs. So when you talk about, you know, organizations that act like bureaucracy, you really kind of hit it on the nail, because the people that work for these bureaucracies often work there because they have to. So they have to in terms, if you think about, you know, Maslow and his theories about the human needs, they do it because they have to in terms to have the ability to have some kind of a paycheck so they can take care of themselves and their families. But they're very often not very unhappy with what they do. So part of what we do is we try to figure out what organizations are going through, and then not only do we do individual assessments, but we also do organizational assessments that allows us to understand what the employees are thinking in terms of gaps. And then we meet with the organizational leadership and propose to them different ways of looking at things and moving forward. And in many cases, just to go back and use a different theory, we like to look at organizations as living organisms, if you would. They have systems and subsystems within them that actually allow for the individual to think for themselves, to be innovative, and to collaborate across different systems. Hopefully that gave you some sort of a good answer, I hope.
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering. I'm sure you're not the only person who approaches maybe the human resource people, or maybe a vice president of the corporation, depending on the size, or a general manager, and say, "This is what I'd like to do for your company." Are you typically called in, or do you typically sort of cold call and provide them with an approach to managing their business that would increase the scope of their business and make their bottom line more attractive to shareholders?
Good questions. We do absolutely zero cold calling. And the reason we don't do that is not because it doesn't work, but it's just because I hate it.
That's a good
So if a person call me, more than likely they're not going to get anywhere.
Right.
So most of the work that we do, we're either called upon to do it, or we are referred to do it. Now, we do have a part of the company that does engage in a process that reaches out to folks and organizations, but that is exclusively from an employee engagement way of thinking. And they do contact HR folks, and they do contact recruiting companies and so forth. And their job is to advance our notion that assessments is really where everything begins. And if we can find organizations, whether they are, it doesn't matter what kind, whether they're public or they're private, that truly listen to their employees, then they do benefit quite a bit by utilizing some of these tools that we have that we call assessments. And a different way of looking at this tool is profiling. We literally do executive profiling of individuals so that we can find out how better to place them in the marketplace.
Yeah. George, do you work solely with the management team, or do you get down to the worker level and work with them one-on-one, with the permission and guidance or supervision of the management team?
Yeah, we're working from the top down. That's where decisions are made in most places where they need to allocate their resources. But let's say, for example, I come to a company and say, hey, this is what's going on. I got a bunch of folks that need some training on team development. And the reason they need the training is because we've just promoted about 4 guys, from being a super worker to being a supervisor. And they were doing pretty good, when they were doing that super worker type work for us. But now that they're supervisors, they're beginning to falter. So we do need for them to learn a new set of skills, perhaps within the entire, subsystem of the organization or a team. So then once that is authorized, we do schedule either on-site type of facilitation training. We can do it also online using a learning management system. And in many cases, when it comes to the executive type of advising that we do that one-on-one, specifically at the corporate level, to ensure that particular executive continues in a growth path that makes them better leaders for the future.
If you had to characterize or categorize the number one problem in general, just a general question of that permeates through all corporations, especially the larger corporations, what's that number one problem that you always seem to face that's ubiquitous among most corporations that you have to overcome or have the management recognize exists so that you can move forward?
The communications process, period.
All right, when you say communications process, I worked for a very large corporation. I will not name anything because I have some bad things to say about the process in the good corporation, but the process really stunk. But when you say the process, would you identify that for me? Because I'm not certain. I may identify process differently than one of our listeners may.
Okay, so just using the word communications alone would probably elicit different visuals in everybody's mind as they sort of try to define what that means in their own terms. And then when we use the word process, again, you're right, different listeners will look at that based on their own experiences and define it in their own terms. Let's just put it within the context of an organization. What we look for an organization to do and to be is to be properly aligned. So we think of alignment in terms of their strategy, their leadership, their systems and processes, their internal customers, and then their loyal customers, where all the output is required to reach and touch. We break that down into another subsystem or sub way of thinking in terms of quality, schedule, and pricing. So when I'm talking about the communications process, we have different responsibilities at every different level of leadership or of management, if you would, within an organization. So if you look at that company that you were thinking about in the past that you worked for that you have ill memories of, think about the executive responsibility of the chief executives were, either the upper management or the top executives, the CEOs, those types of folks. Their responsibility lies within the realm of developing a strategy. But that strategy, we can call it planning if you want to, but that planning process takes a good amount of time to develop, and then also after you develop it, to articulate it. So when I say the communications process, what I mean is at the top very level of the organization, they have the responsibility to ensure that their goals, their value system, their target markets, whatever it is that is really important for that organization to function, has to be communicated, first of all, to their leadership teams or their management teams. But not only communicated, and that's why I inject the word there, the word process. It has to be not only understood when they communicate it, but it has to be internalized to the point that there is buy-in from members of the team. That particular buy-in can be a difficult thing to achieve, because if you go back to the original statement, in our opening statement, when you said that you would at least hope that everybody will be an entrepreneur. Well, when that kind of thinking, that entrepreneurial thinking is engaged in that communications process, it will elicit some discord. There will be some disagreement. So I believe strongly that it is in that disagreement of that communications process that even as the sparks will fly, that's where innovation really is born. That's where it exists. Once you have that buy-in from that communications process, then the leadership team, the middle management sort of team, then they also have the responsibility to articulate that through, their internal customers, which is what I like to call them. So if we're going to treat our employees as our internal customers, then it is upon us as leaders within an organization to make sure that they have the tools, the information, the strategies of what the corporation is thinking about or is trying to achieve. Because what happens is they become the points of connections between the organization and our loyal customers. So we want to ensure that they have the right messages, they believe in the message, they believe in what they're selling. Because it is important for the folks that you are trying to serve, both internally and externally, to have confidence in what it is that you're trying to sell or you're trying to communicate.
But in that process, there's the fear factor. When I worked for large corporation, I worked for a large multinational corporation, and the fear factor of what the perception will be of the upper level of management from where this person was, and I was in management, upper level was colored the thinking of everyone's of the entire process, and together with that you have it's sort of, remember that game where someone you sit around in a circle and a person whispers into one person's ear a statement, and then the next person whispers it all the way down, and by the time it reaches the eighth or ninth person, the message is totally different. And so you have two things going, I think, awry here. I mean, not what you're doing, but I'm saying embedded within corporations. And that is, you have this fear factor of, well, I want to make sure that my boss knows that I'm supporting what he's doing, even if I think he's wrong, but I'll fake it to all the other people. They'll know it's wrong, but they'll fake it because they don't want to get fired, And at the same time, I may even misinterpret what my boss, what the strategy is developed by upper management. But then we can add another cherry to that cake and say, well, what if the strategy is wrong? What if there's someone in the lower levels of the organization? This was my beef. The lower levels of the organization, can say, hey, good idea, but it doesn't work because, this person could be actually ostracized, maybe even fired for disagreeing with someone who is godlike in the corporate structure. This is what really grabbed me when I was working for a large corporation. And later on, I'm going to tell you a story that you will not believe. But how do you respond to that?
Well, the best response that I can give you is, just because you're the top boss in a large organization doesn't make you the smarter person in the room.
Well, typically they're not. Typically they're not. Typically there's a lower level person. It's not the vice president or the second person in charge. It may be the person 8 rungs down that has a clearer vision. Now he's not dictating what's going on, but just the fact that this person gives a suggestion on what to do, it's nullified only because this person doesn't have the rank in the hierarchy, and everyone else in between incorporates this fear factor because who's going to disagree with the boss? It's like the military. Yes, sir. You want me to bomb that place? Yes, sir. Oh, wonderful idea, sir. And they go, they don't care who they kill. They just bomb and everyone's happy. But God forbid someone disagrees with them, then all of a sudden they're ostracized for it, or they may even be court-martialed. And I feel the same way with corporations are like the military, no difference.
So a couple of good points that you brought out in terms of what we look at. The fear factor, obviously, it's rampant. And so what is the root cause of that fear factor? And then, again, going back to misinterpreting communications, like the example that you cited with the number of folks sitting around a circle, then the one at the end starts a rumor. By the time it gets to the last person, the whole world just came to an end. So how does an organization deal with these kinds of issues? It does begin at the top. So like anything else, organizations have cultures. So organizational culture, it's something that truly begins top down. There's very little that somewhere in middle management, an employee or even a manager can affect culture with any type of change, unless the top leadership team wants to do it. So there's different types of leaders, and they use different types of approaches to truly get their work done. The one style that I love the most is it's probably the one that is the least known. We call that servant leadership. And the servant leader spends a lot of time doing a lot of different things for all the right reasons. And that type of leadership is seen throughout the organization. And what happens is, when that leadership is working at the right levels because they model the right behaviors, then everybody else wants to be like them. Everybody else begins to emulate that type of behavior. So if the culture of the organization believes in trusting folks, if they believe in decentralized thinking, if they believe in empowering their teams to execute whatever tasks they have to do and make decisions at their levels based on whatever resources are allocated, then you can begin to see that fear factor begin to dissipate. But it requires that CEO or that C-level type team to truly engage in a sustained campaign of communications that consistently and repeatedly, in a very recurring basis, continue to articulate the ideas and the strategies that they have designed for everyone in the organization, specifically how they will serve their clients or their customers. Now let's go back to the other part of why communications is so different and so difficult, and why on that example that you cited, started with the first person and then it went all the way to the left and then ended up with something else. So when you think about communications process, we could think of it in a technical way of looking at it. So the communications process is nothing more than transmitting a signal. So you have a sender and then you have a receiver. So that person that we talked about earlier, he was the sender, and he's transmitted a signal. In other words, he whispered in somebody's ear and he told that person something. Well, that person that began that particular conversation had a responsibility to articulate whatever it was that he or she was saying in a very clear and concise way, so that the receiver would have no problems interpreting what that message was. But what occurs is that we usually don't communicate very effectively because we do it very quickly, and we don't explain ourselves very good in terms of what it is that we're trying to get the other person to understand. That problem is compounded even more when you think about the different individual cultural or even ethnic differences in terms of how they grew up, their level of education, their, whether or not they have English as a second or a third language. So the person that is receiving that message is going to interpret it based on how they see life itself. So as they try to pass it to the next person, they synthesize or they paraphrase what they think they'd heard. So it breaks that communications process down. And at the end of the day, what we have really is a grapevine that is spreading rumors. So I will continue to stand by the communications process is probably the most difficult thing that we do, especially in a society like ours that is truly a salad bowl of different cultures and different languages.
But, how often do you hear Joe Blow got promoted because he's a real suck-up, I mean, he sucks up. Management says that black is white, and they say, oh, yes, sir, absolutely, black is white. And the guy who's a thinker, forward-moving person, a person who thinks critically, doesn't have the same promotional opportunities as the suck-up. I mean, that's a real grind in most organizations. And I want to add to that, is this not waning because in today's environment, aren't large corporations finding that the individual entrepreneur with smartphones and with apps and with the decentralization of business itself, aren't corporations finding more of a strain in that regard, in that an individual now can do as much business on a smartphone as a large corporation can do with maybe 500 employees?
Well, this is a challenge, and this is going back to that entrepreneurial thinking you were talking about. So this particular type of communications requires skills and it requires knowledge. So this goes back to what type of organization you're working with. I mean, I can give you examples of organizations that I worked for where it didn't matter how many apps you had or how many smartphones you had because they were not allowed in the workplace.
Yeah.
So I worked for organizations to where we had very high government clearances. So even in our desktops, we were firewalled from even accessing social media. Now, the work that we did was very specific from an engineering perspective and from a global perspective. And so we were working with organizations that were truly engaged in delivering new technologies and solutions globally, but our ability to think was compartmentalized and actually behind closed doors. So in that particular environment, the individual thinker or team member really relies more on the team, the person next to him or her, based on their skills. So let's go back for a minute to that person that said, "Boy, Joe Blow just got promoted because he's a
suck up."
Yeah, yeah. So that's the kind.
I like that word.
Yes, it's suck up. Well, so that goes back to perception, and I'm not going to say it doesn't exist. I'm sure that it does. I have seen people that were probably less qualified than others, but because of other different characteristics that they had, they moved up. So you may have an organization that is trying to work with the public relations folks, and they want to portray to the outside world that they have the right type of diversity in their organization with the right type of ethnicities and genders in leadership positions. So they may, sacrifice a person that is a lot more competent and more qualified because they don't necessarily meet that particular indicator. So that could be it's an area of dissent for the individual that knows that he or she was passed over because of something other than competence and skills.
Right.
So what I would go back and tell that employee that felt that way is, I would, kind of be generous. Is, look, I understand how you feel, but why don't we confirm what it is that you're saying? Because maybe you haven't seen what that other person does or has been doing.
Right. There's two sides to that coin, and I understand that. George, can you hold on a second? We have someone holding on a line, and maybe they want to ask a question. Caller, area 761 on line 1. Oh, would you if you want to ask a question, that's area code 760, is that? 760. If you want to ask a question, please press 1 so we'll know that you want to be on the air and we don't embarrass you. Nope. They did? Okay. Caller, area code 760, you're on the air. Your first name, please.
This is Dr. Jeff Stewart. Can you hear me?
Yes, doctor. Yes, thank you very much for calling Liberty Talk Radio. Your question or comment, please.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up on the whole idea of communications in and around diverse perspectives, points of view. I like to look at it like the culture of an organization is a fine gem. And if you cut it wrong, you're going to shatter it. If you cut it right, it's going to have more facets and more prismatic value to the outside world, to the buying group, those that buy in either as stakeholders or a broader constituency in social and political terms. So the idea is, how do you cut your commands? How do you cut your facets so that they make it work for a greater attractiveness in the world around you and increase the value of what you bring to that broader world? So just given that analogy, what I'd like to suggest, some cultures are harder than others. It's like a diamond versus an emerald. An emerald is pretty hard, but it's also, it shatters very easily because it's fragile. On the other hand, a diamond is exceedingly hard, and it's not that fragile unless you just get it right with the superior force. So I think in the cultures that Sergeant Major Gutierrez has addressed, the hardness is closer to diamond, or in some cases on special assignment, even adamantine natures, that we don't see the shattering, but we see the need for very tightly focused facets that take the insights from the outside world and reflect them back on the outside world in a way that draws the right attention to the action of the moment, the intelligent force that has to be applied against a goal or an objective.
But I agree, but I don't know, Doctor, how you achieve that.
I hope that you can deal with it.
Yeah, but I don't know how that's achieved. I think that's the $1 million question, and how do you achieve that balance, and whether you're achieving the balance. When you're dealing with human nature and people and different emotions, the variables are infinite, and I don't know how that's done. But hold on, don't go off the line, because we have another caller, and maybe they want to join our conversation. What area? Line 2, right? They're on line 2. And what's their area code? They gone? What's the area code? Oh, we have a caller from 918. 918, you're on the air. Your comment and question, please. Caller, you're on the air. Area code 918, you're on the air. May we have your question or comment, please? Okay, they must be just listening in. Okay, that's fine. Okay, Doctor. All right. I'm sorry, Doctor, for the interruption. We thought someone wanted to add to what you were saying. Well, anyway, I guess I'm your eternal pessimist when it comes to these organizational things, because I've worked in large corporations for more years than I'd like to remember. And quite frankly, most of my years, although I did pretty well, I was moderately well, I was always very disappointed in the structure of corporations, and the and the need by even upper management to always please somebody else above them, at the expense of even the corporate culture, at the expense of even the goals and objectives of the corporation. And I saw this over and over again. And I often wonder now whether or not the large corporation is dead on arrival. I mean, this is an elephant, ready to die, because of technology is breaking up these corporations. You take the largest cab company in the world is Uber. They don't own one cab, and they don't have one employee. I mean, they may have a dozen employees. I'm just saying the world is changing, and yet I think the corporations are still, many of them are operating under the old regime of, top-down management. And I'm not sure if they can change fast enough to save themselves.
Well, that's a good observation. So let's go back a little bit to a couple of things and maybe explain it differently, and also talk to some of what Dr. Stewart identified, using the analogy of a diamond that is rough,
right,
and how difficult it is to sort of cut through that roughness. So you're absolutely right. When organizations are top-down organized in their structure, part of what we do is we look at the lines of communications and their span and control methodology. And what we often find is something that you're actually talking about based on your experience. We actually see that the lines of communications are very clear, and it goes almost straight. I mean, they might deviate a little bit, but then they never go laterally, and they're only talking to department heads, if you would. When the organizations are designed like this, they pretty much act like a machine, which is really what you're trying to describe. And it's very frustrating because the individual contributor has very little input on the future of the organization. So what happens is that they lose their agility. So when change occurs, like it's happening, right now with our technology growth or explosion, if you would, is that either they adapt to the changes or they will die, and something else or someone else will replace what they do, because they'll have that agility that normally entrepreneurial spirits have, because it's like you said, Uber doesn't even own a cab, so they don't even need an office. They've found a business model to where each person can be their own entrepreneur.
Yeah, their own CEO, if you will, okay? You're using a corporate lingo, right? Everybody's their own CEO, and they make their own decisions based on the strategy that the overall corporation has outlined, meaning, you're free to pick people up and go around. Of course, you can't attack these people. You have to be nice to them. You have to be the owner of your own business every time someone gets into your car. And by the way, that's going by the wayside, because with the driverless cars, even these people can be out of business, but we won't go there. Please continue.
So very good way of putting it. So that cab driver, that Uber driver now, he knows that as a CEO of his own little organism, his own little living organization, which is just him and that cab, he knows that what just the fare that he just took on is his client. So he better do his best to communicate, to serve that client, and to make sure that that client has a quality, that he delivers them on schedule, and he does it with the right pricing. So that client will call him back later and say, no, you are my Uber. So anytime I need to go somewhere, can I call you? What's occurring in these large organizations is they've lost sight of that. And so they don't really communicate their strategies internally in a way that their employees have the buy-in that is required for them to advance really the bottom line. So let's look at it differently, because earlier you used the military as an example of a top-down organization that, barks out orders, and if you don't do what they say, oh my God, then the fear factor truly comes in. Let's think about how the military has been able to adapt and grow over time, okay? And I have colleagues, and we talk about these phrases often. They realize the need to articulate their plans and their strategies at every level, okay? So that type of organization looks at least 2 levels down to ensure that whatever it is they're planning, it goes 2 levels of command down. Let's think about normative. Have you ever heard, or any of the listeners, and if you have, call in, the expression LGOP? LGOP, LGOPP, stands for Little Groups of Pissed Off Paratroopers.
I had not heard that before. But before you go further, I failed to do something. Could we put the telephone number on the screen, please? The telephone call-in number, the banner. It's not working? Oh, that's great. That's wonderful. Don't ever admit that to anyone, especially on the air. All right, folks, if you want to call in and be part of this conversation, call in 646-652-4620. 646-652-4620. Now, it's always worked, right? Prior to having this. So we're going to bill our guests for breaking it. Okay, I just want to know who we're going to bill for it. Okay, we'll have that fixed by the next program. Okay, George, please continue. I just want to get the telephone number, 646-652-4620. And if you want to make a comment, press the 1 button so we know that you want to break in on the conversation. Please continue.
All right, so I'm going to use a little bit of history, and I'm hoping to get it right. And if I don't, I sort of apologize in advance. But if we remember World War II, there was a place called Normandy, and we jumped into Normandy. We meaning Allied forces and so forth. But the Americans, as Americans, we had a mission, and our mission was to go do something to the enemy on the other side of the world. Well, we had organizations, the 82nd Airborne Division, for example, they jumped in, and what occurred is that they were dropped in the wrong drop zone.
Right, yeah, I heard that.
So these are teams that were cross-loaded in very different planes so that when they exit the aircraft, the cross-loading advances the theory that throughout the descent, the teams that belong to one another land within the same proximity of each other. And once they land and secure themselves, they're able to regroup and continue with their mission. Well, that didn't work. They were all dropped in the wrong place. When people were looking around on the ground, they didn't even know each other. So they began to kind of walk by or go and kind of check in with everybody and try to figure out, who they were and where were their buddies. So what occurred was that people of rank, staff sergeants or lieutenants, and people of different ranks that had different levels of responsibility formed small groups. Now, what these little groups, what these brand new units, if you would, these brand new organizations, they formed, the one thing they had in common was that their leadership at the corporate level, if you would, okay, they knew in advance that all these trained professionals needed to accomplish their mission was about three things. First of all, they need to have a mission that they believed in, and that they knew what it was. Second, they need to know what the intent of that mission was, and third, what the purpose of that mission was, and then lastly, what the task.
Right.
So that they simply operated under intent, purpose, and task. They had that unity of thought. They were able to form brand new organizations that allowed them to move the strategy that was well articulated from the corporate level and deliver it to the enemy with extreme prejudice at the time. And I think we know what the outcome of World War II was, and we also know, the success of Normandy. So going back to using this particular analogy, even though the military does use a very strict and functional chain of command, corporate organizations do that as well. However, in the example that you described earlier, what they truly continue to struggle with, and that's why you see sort of the cultural problem that I thought was very well, articulated in terms of how you affect the culture by Dr. Stewart, is because they haven't really mastered their communications process, or their information campaigns, or how they deliver, their communications to everybody in the organization. So I still believe, whether you're a solopreneur or an entrepreneur or a one-man company, if you would, or a company that has 10,000 employees, the technical side of things, that's the fun part. I don't think they have a problem with that. I think they will continue to struggle with how they communicate with their teams and with their customers. So that is why we take that particular, challenge very serious, and we focus on trying to improve communicating skills at every level, so that we're able to grow companies, and grow leaders as well.
Dr. Stewart, are you still on the line? Oh, he left us. Okay. This is my experience, and I'm going back to, I think they were dinosaurs on the earth when I was working for large corporations. That's how far away it was. Anyway, but on numerous occasions, with the companies that I worked with, consultants would come in and they would establish a program, some sort of management program to involve the employees, to improve productivity, whatever. One I recall, and I'm going back, this is going to go back at least 50 years, management by objectives. You remember that program? That was a big thing. And, of course, then the quality program and all that. But they initiated these programs, but it was dictated to the people doing the work, and to the people at work, all it was to them was something they had to do. Now they had to do their work and then fill out this form. They really were a part of the process. I got so frustrated, and I'm not kidding you. This is the God's honest truth. You can check the government, what do you call the archives or whatever they call it, registration. But I got so frustrated. I started giving speeches on management, and I actually trademarked a name called corporate exorcist. I was America's foremost corporate exorcist, and I was booked as that, as America's foremost corporate exorcist, because the companies needed an exorcism. I actually went to a company that hired me, paid me good money to come in, and I had no idea what their problem was, But I had to find out when I got up in front of the entire company, and I started to speak to them, and they started telling me what the problem was. And what I did is I drew on an easel. I said, this is an long time ago, before we had even, what do you call rear projection stuff and whatever. I said, give me an easel, and, I had a black magic marker, and I drew a triangle. And I said, who's the top person in the organization, most important person in the organization? And of course, everyone said the president, so I put the president up there. And we went down, to vice president, all the way down supervisor to the mailroom, and, and then we got the receptionist almost on the bottom with the mailroom people. And I said, fine. I said, now, who really is the most important aspect of your whole corporation? And everyone agreed it was the customer. I said, great. So the customer is most important. So now where do we put the customer on this triangle, on this higher, this pyramid? Where do we put the triangle? And they had struggled with that. They said, well, put them on top. I said, good. We'll put the customer on top. The second person now is the president of the corporation. That means that every time a customer has a problem, he calls the president. And the room went silent. I'm not kidding. I made this up. I was flying by the seat of my pants because I had no idea what to talk about with these people. And they said, no. They call into the operator. So we went all the way down to the base of the triangle. And I said, all right, so the person who's getting paid minimum wage, the least important person in the company, is now conversing with the most important person in the corporation. How do you reconcile that? Why does she give a damn? She can say, look, I'm busy. I'm doing my nails. Goodbye. Click. No one know the difference. And I said, I know they don't do that. And it was awakening. And you know what the conclusion was? By everyone, that they really didn't need the president. So right then and there, we fired the president. We fired the president. I mean, of course, it was done in a jokingly manner, but it really opened everyone's eyes. But you know whose eyes it opened up the most? The president's eyes. And he overpaid me for that speech. And that's God's honest truth. And I still have this trademark, America's foremost corporate exorcist. That's how frustrated I was in corporate America and how poorly it was done. I want to give you another example. I worked for this one corporation where we dealt with highly personal, confidential information. And I was in charge of this facility. And one of our trucks, now I wasn't the top guy, but I was in charge of the facility. A truck got in this hellacious accident, and all of these personal papers were spewed all over the highway. I mean, all over the place. I got a crew of people out there to clean the whole place up. The next morning, I got up at 3 o'clock in the morning, got out there at 4 o'clock in the dark, and walked that entire mile to make sure there was not one piece of paper anywhere. And I found about 20 pieces of paper that was stuck in hedges and trees and all over the place. And I never forget, because I was picking stuff up off the concrete, I had worn down my nails, and my nails looked like almost like a fork. It was all pointy. I didn't know it at the time. In fact, my nails were bleeding, and I didn't even know it. Well, we picked up every single confidential piece of information, and every piece of paper was confidential. Had people's names, numbers on it, and social security numbers. It was horrible. And I went to the meeting, and I was late for this regular, Tuesday morning meeting or whatever it was. Nothing important. It was just a general meeting. And I walked in. My hands were bleeding the whole bit. I was like 10 minutes late, No one knew that accident ever occurred. The company never got, it was no press. We thought it would be in the press. We would be sued 16 ways from Sunday. But I was in trouble because I arrived 10 minutes late for the meeting.
Yeah.
And that's a true story. And I stood there and I said, this is where I walk out. I mean, I saved this company from multi-million-dollar lawsuits, several multi-million-dollar lawsuits, and I was, to a worthless meeting, I was 10 minutes late, and I got chastised for it. And I was never said, Joe, thanks for saving us. Not once. So, and they had a quality program at the time. A quality program to get everyone involved. And I said, what a bunch of bunk. And I'll bet most employees who get involved or participate in these programs think the same way I did. What's your response to that?
Well, let's go back to the way that we started this particular segment. MBO, management by objectives. So right. Management by objectives really, to me, elicit memories of the organizational design theory of organizations as a machine.
Right. So
the way that you describe it, I'm going to hold this piece of paper up. The way that you described it, really, if you look at it, I don't know if anybody can see. Can you see that?
Yeah, that's the chart that I made when I made that speech to that group.
Okay, so
that's
so
it, the triangle, the pyramid. We call it the pyramid.
So you remember that pyramid with
Absolutely.
the CEO, and when you ask who's the most important person, they say the CEO, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Well, then look the capstone or the foundation of that triangle is the customer.
Absolutely.
So in a different kind of vernacular, we can say crap runs downhill.
Right.
Well, so this is how we do it today. This is a way that we treat this sort of organizational way of looking at things. Can you see that?
Sure, you turned it upside down. Okay.
We turned it upside down, and what's on top is the client, is the customer.
Right. Agree.
What's on the bottom is the CEO and the strategy. What's inside that particular upside down triangle is the internal client. Those are the employees. And that's why we go back and say communications is the most important or the most difficult thing, to work in an organization, because your employees are the people that are talking to your clients. They're the points of connections, and their job is to advance your theories or your MBOs, if you would, management by objectives, or your strategy. So unless we begin to truly think about the importance of the individual at every level of the organization, then we're going to continue to struggle with this communications thing as a real problem, because people will act on fear. You're going to have management teams that are untrained, and they're going to chastise guys because he was 10 minutes late, instead of asking him what was wrong, what happened, are you okay, did you have an accident, and sort of display that human side of things that organizations as a machine by design wrote out of their organizational structure. Okay, so what's the answer? How do we deal with this? Part of what we do in terms of how we differ from other consultants, because you did bring this point up, and you said that then consultants come into the organizations and they teach you all these new things. Now all of a sudden they just added more work to what we have to do, and then they walk away. So yeah, we got trained, and now we got more checklists to go through. Well, we use what we call the space-time repetition concept, which means when we come and train you, we take an approach. We use a formula that targets positive behavior changes, so that the people that are going through these types of training honestly do begin to internalize these concepts and change the way they think, the way they behave in a positive way. So we look at it from an attitude perspective, okay? So let's just say a company calls me and he goes, look, we need you to train our team leaders on how to lead teams. Well, then the first thing we do is we look at attitude as a method for them to grow. So we think that when attitude is not enough, we think that the right attitude is what matters. So if you combine skills plus knowledge with the right attitude, and then you give folks, real specific goals to achieve, and then what you will see that combination of attitude, skills, knowledge, and goals actually leads to positive behavior changes. When that is experienced at the individual level, what you see at the corporate level is improved results.
But don't you have to convince, excuse me, George, but don't you have to convince the CEO or the president of that inverted pyramid whereby he is a support structure for the entire organization and not the grand, high, exotic, mystic ruler that they think that they are?
Absolutely. And most times when I'm able to explain it and put it in front of them like that, nine times out of 10, I get positive feedback.
Where were you when I needed you, George? Where were you when I needed? I'm telling you, I am so frustrated. I mean, for me to go spend about $1,000 to get a trademark just so I can speak as a corporate executive, you can imagine how frustrated I was. And I was a good, hardworking employee, and I'm an entrepreneur. I mean, so I had a lot to offer. But let me tell you something, I couldn't play the game. And I knew guys who played the game who did very well, and it just sickened my stomach. And I'll bet you most people feel the same way, maybe not so much today, because corporations are waking up to the fact that the old world is coming apart and the new world doesn't need the corporation in the same light.
Not in the same way, because, we have a lot more access to data and information that at one time it was only able, for the corporations, for the big businesses.
Yeah.
Think about the cell phone. Do you remember when we walked around with this big, huge thing, of a cell phone?
Yeah, I had the battery in a red wagon.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so anytime we saw somebody with one of those huge phones, we originally said that's a big guy. That's got to be a businessman, because we don't have access to that technology. Well, that's changed. Not everybody's got access to a smartphone, just like you said earlier, and people are literally managing their organizations from a smartphone.
Right.
So the world is changing. Organizations that are not able to adapt will die, and other ones will emerge. Especially with the younger generation, who actually never seen a cell phone that huge. That access to that type of data to them is normal. I mean, I still struggle sometimes trying to keep up with all these different things, but I think the message is clear: adapt or die.
Yeah. George, we have a guest here who wants to ask a question. You turn on his mic.
Well, hey, George, this is Jim here. Can you see me now?
Oh, okay.
Hi, Jim. How you doing?
Oh, there he is. Okay, I'll move over.
Yeah. Nice to
okay.
meet you, George. Hey, George, as I've listened to this broadcast and learned a little bit more about your philosophy and approach to working with clients, perhaps, so I understand conceptually how you work with organizations. Could you give us a real quick example of a case study of a successful engagement and the impact you had with your solution?
Yeah, you can sit down over there, and we can. He's using my microphone. I want you to know. I gave him a microphone. He's using mine.
Did you hear my question?
Yeah. Did you hear the question?
Yes, I heard the question.
Okay.
I'm trying to select an organization without violating their.
Well, you don't have to name it if you just want to say. You don't have to just share. Just I'd like to hear just a little bit about the engagement. If you don't want to specifically reference the.
We're done.
Well, we spent a couple of years in the Midwest working with a manufacturing organization that was truly making the valorous effort of changing how they behaved organizationally, mostly because their work had increased so much that they just had to change, but they didn't have the right systems in place to do that. So this organization, when we first started, had, I think when I flew there, they first had about 102 employees. And the first 3 months, I spent it living in the CEO's house in an apartment he had downstairs. And what we mostly did was worked about 16 hours a day, thinking about the future and doing a new company design of the future is what we called it. Within those 3 months, I spent most of that time doing the right type of listening, the one that I described earlier on, when we opened up. Engaged listening, surveying every single leader and every single person of the organization. Now, it wasn't that many; it was only 100 or so. So it took a while for me to take all that data in and then kind of do the analysis to figure out, what kind of an impact their suggestions would have, as we moved forward. So think about it. It's about 90 days. That's the first 90-day plan that we went through it. This company had been in business for about, 22 years. And they started doing their work out of their garage. The best year they had, I think, before they had their biggest client was somewhere around 6 million. And that number kind of scared him because they weren't ready for that, to process all of that internally. by the time, in terms of an impact, by the time we were done working together as a team, they were grossing about 1.3 million a year. Their best year was around 20.3 million a year. When we got there, they had about 3 or 4 major clients. By the time we exited, they had 57 major clients, and they had implemented systems and processes organizationally that truly recognized not only, the achievement of the management team, but also of their employees. Now, it doesn't mean that everything is rosy. They did have a lot of problems. They had to cut people, somewhere in between. They did have to reduce, their overhead a couple of times. They also brought folks back. But I'm giving you a sort of the case study of a 2-year thing that almost goes alongside with part of the process that Joe described when the consultants came in. And then after they sold what they did, they just left. We don't. We stay with you. We stay with you for a sufficient amount of time to where the company can afford it, number two, and then we can help you go through the growth process and manage it at every level. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, and as opposed to consultants
We're
that may
about
just,
out of time,
okay,
too.
that may just leave a solution to recommendations, you stay with them through coaching and through the implementation, it sounds like. So I know Joe says
Yeah.
we're nearing the end of our time.
Yeah, unfortunately, the clock has run out on us, George. So I'd like to give you the last 30 seconds to wrap things up. And in advance, I'd like to thank you so much for being on our show. And I want to offer you my services at a 10% discount as America's foremost corporate exorcist because you've been on Liberty Talk Radio. How about that? What a deal.
Oh, what a deal. You can't give that up.
Yeah, the next 30 seconds are all yours.
Well, thank you very much. I truly appreciate the opportunity to be here. I am Jorge Gutierrez. I am the principal of the BMOCgroup, where we do, in fact, partner with individuals and with organizations to drive growth. We take that very seriously. If you're interested to talk with me and learn more about what we do, please feel free to reach out. You can call the number 888-720-6996 and follow the prompts that will probably annoy you, but give us a call.
Okay, George, thank you so much for being on Liberty Talk Radio. Folks, this is the end of today's broadcast. We'd like to thank our sponsors for the financial support, and we'd like to thank you for listening in. You can further the cause of liberty by recommending this program to your friends and let us hear from you. Our email address is comments@libertytalkradio.com. Remember, you're either allowing your liberties to be taken away or you're striving to protect them. Unfortunately, folks, there is no middle ground. Until next time, this is Joe Cristiano. You've been listening to Liberty Talk Radio. Stay well, stay tuned.